It begins with an intercepted signal, a faint, broken transmission received by US Army intelligence outside Paris in February 1945. The message, written in a mix of code and colloquial German, mentions letters of the lady at the mountain and the one he trusts when the guns fall silent. Analysts at the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, dismiss it at first, but when similar transmissions surface days later, traced through diplomatic channels in neutral Switzerland, something changes. Someone close to Adolf Hitler, it seems, has been writing letters that the Reich never intended to see the light of day. By this stage of the war, Europe is collapsing into chaos. The Allies have crossed the Rhine. Soviet tanks are advancing through Poland, closing in on Berlin from the east. And yet, inside the intelligence offices of London and Washington, a quiet race begins. One not for land or victory, but for knowledge. What did Hitler's inner circle know in those final months? And what did they fear? British cryptographers at Bletchley Park, working with US counterparts, begin decrypting intercepted messages believed to involve Swiss intermediaries. Within the data, one word appears repeatedly: Berghof. Hitler's mountain retreat in the Bavarian Alps. Another codename surfaces: EB. In the OSS archives, that abbreviation carries immediate recognition. Eva Braun, Hitler's mistress, long hidden from the German public, but well known to Allied intelligence through intercepted correspondence and photographic records. A British report dated March 6, 1945, classified top secret notes. Information indicates personal documents belonging to Eva Braun may have been removed from the Obersalzberg estate prior to aerial bombardment. Destination: Zurich or Geneva via neutral couriers. The report triggers Operation Lantern, a joint Anglo-American effort to trace these documents. Their suspected contents, intimate letters, diaries, or even confessions, could provide rare insight into Hitler's state of mind as the Third Reich crumbled. At the heart of this search is Captain William Harper, US Counterintelligence Corps, 97th Infantry Division. Harper's unit has been tasked with tracing Nazi fugitives and securing sensitive archives across southern Germany. His orders, though vague, include one explicit objective: locate any documents marked EB before Soviet forces do. The fear is not only what the Soviets might discover, but how they might use it. In the shadowy world of post-war politics, information is as valuable as victory itself. The challenge is immense. Germany in 1945 is a landscape of destruction. Cities flattened, communication lines severed, and people on the move in all directions. Refugees, soldiers, and spies blur together in a desperate tide. Yet Harper's small intelligence team begins to piece together fragments. A courier captured near Innsbruck carrying coded Swiss accounts, a report of a burned villa on the Obersalzberg, and a single photograph found in a ruined staff car. Eva Braun smiling beside Hitler, taken in 1944, inscribed on the back with the initials EBFL for the OSS. This is more than curiosity. If Braun's letters exist, they could hold psychological value, evidence of Hitler's deteriorating state, or his fears of betrayal. Historians later note that Allied command had already begun psychological profiling of Nazi leadership. The Donovan Report, compiled by OSS psychiatrists, described Hitler as narcissistic, unstable, and dependent on emotional validation. Eva's letters could confirm or contradict that assessment, exposing the human dynamic behind the world's most destructive leader. But with every lead, danger grows. Allied bombers are preparing to strike Berchtesgaden, the very heart of the Führer's Alpine sanctuary. If the documents are still there, they risk being buried forever. In late April 1945, as Hitler withdraws into his Berlin bunker, Harper's CIC detachment crosses into Bavaria. Their destination, the ruins of the Berghof, where rumor has it, Eva Braun left behind more than clothes and photographs. Perhaps the final emotional footprint of the Third Reich's most enigmatic woman. As night falls over the mountains, a courier arrives at Harper's temporary headquarters in Salzburg with a sealed envelope marked "Eyes Only." Inside, a single sheet of paper. Intercepted communication Zurich. Sender unknown. Mentions letters of Eva. Destination, London, not Moscow. The tension is palpable. Somewhere amid the collapse of Nazi Germany, someone else is already looking for the same letters. Not to expose them, but to keep them hidden. And so the search begins. one driven not by the clash of armies, but by the quiet pursuit of secrets in the final days of war. The Allies are no longer just fighting to end the Reich, they're racing to understand it. What they find next, deep in the charred remains of Hitler's mountain retreat, will only deepen the mystery. The war may be ending, but the real story, the secret one, written in ink and fear, is only beginning. The road to Berchtesgaden winds through a landscape of shattered beauty, snow-covered peaks, bombed-out villages, and desperate columns of refugees streaming toward the west. In early May 1945, Captain William Harper and his small counterintelligence corps detachment move under orders from US 7th Army headquarters to secure the ruins of Hitler's Alpine fortress, the Berghof, perched high on the Obersalzberg. Their mission is quiet, unofficial, and dangerous. Locate and recover any personal correspondence or records connected to Eva Braun before the Soviets arrive. By now, the Third Reich is collapsing from within. The radio in Harper's jeep crackles with reports. Hitler dead by suicide in Berlin, the Reich Chancellery in flames, and the Red Army advancing toward the heart of the city. But in the Bavarian Alps, pockets of resistance remain. SS troops, die-hard loyalists, and scattered elements of the 1st SS Panzer Division, Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, have withdrawn to what they believe will be the Reich's final redoubt. Rumors spread of secret vaults, gold, and classified archives hidden deep within the mountains. For Harper and his team, the rumors mean both danger and opportunity. As they approach the Berghof on May 4th, they find the air thick with smoke. Allied bombers from the Royal Air Force had struck the compound weeks earlier, turning Hitler's retreat into a blackened shell. Yet among the ashes, remnants of personal life remain: scorched furniture, fragments of silverware bearing the Führer's initials, and the twisted remains of a camera tripod. One sergeant calls Harper over to what looks like a charred metal safe. Inside, barely legible under the soot, lies a roll of undeveloped film and several partially burned letters. The ink blurred but unmistakable. EB at the bottom corner. Back at their makeshift headquarters, Harper orders the film carefully developed by an Army Signal Corps photographer. The images that emerge are intimate, even banal. Eva Braun at the Berghof garden, walking her Scottish terriers, smiling beside Hitler. But one frame stands out. A photograph of Braun standing beside a woman in uniform, her face turned away from the camera. On the back, faint writing in German reads, "Für Leni, keep this safe." The name Leni immediately draws suspicion. Could it refer to Leni Riefenstahl, the filmmaker, or another woman in Braun's inner circle? Intelligence cross-references suggest a more obscure name: Leni Schneider, Braun's private secretary, last seen in Munich in late April. From this point, Harper's operation takes a new turn. Through interrogation of captured SS adjutants, his team learns that a courier, possibly this same Leni, boarded a train from Munich to Innsbruck, carrying a satchel of personal papers marked with Braun's handwriting. The trail, however, goes cold amid the chaos of Germany's surrender. Harper sends word to British intelligence in Vienna for assistance. The Special Operations Executive, SOE, eager to recover any propaganda-sensitive material, dispatches 2 operatives to coordinate the search: Lieutenant Margaret Peggy Thorne, a cryptanalyst fluent in German, and Captain Douglas Fenwick, an SOE field officer who'd spent years infiltrating Nazi networks across occupied France. Together, they piece together the courier's likely route. Reports from railway staff mention a woman travelling under the alias Helene Bauer, carrying diplomatic papers bearing a Swiss cross. The documents grant safe passage to Zurich through a Red Cross convoy, a cover frequently used by Nazi officials seeking refuge or financial channels abroad. Harper and Thorne suspect she's carrying Braun's final correspondence, intended for neutral intermediaries or possibly for publication after Hitler's death. The investigation now becomes a race, not only against time, but against other Allied agencies. Soviet agents advancing from Austria are already questioning witnesses in nearby Salzburg. Their orders: seize any material related to Hitler's private life. The Soviets view Braun as a key psychological puzzle piece, a woman who could illuminate the dictator's hidden insecurities. If her letters contain confessions or contradictions, the USSR wants them for propaganda. For Harper and the SOE, that cannot happen. The search for the mysterious secretary takes them from Innsbruck to a small village near the Swiss border, where they find the remnants of a destroyed convoy. 2 burned trucks, their occupants executed by unknown assailants. Scattered among the wreckage are German identity papers and a torn envelope addressed to Fräulein E. Braun, Obersalzberg, April 1945. The handwriting is elegant, unmistakably female, and in the lower corner, faint graphite notations read Zur Weitergabe an Zürich, vertraulich, for transfer to Zürich, confidential. The implication is chilling. Someone in Hitler's circle, perhaps Eva herself, had planned to smuggle out her letters as Germany fell apart. But who was meant to receive them? And why through neutral Switzerland? British files later suggest these communications may have been intended for a journalist sympathetic to Braun, or even a lover outside the Reich. No definitive answer ever emerges. By the time Harper reports back to headquarters, his team has collected a handful of leads, a name, a burned photograph, and an idea of what may have escaped. But as the Berghof smoulders behind them, the feeling among the men is one of unease. In recovering the traces of Eva Braun's private world, they have opened a window into the final, intimate chaos of Nazi power. A chaos that now seems to move beyond control. As Harper gazes toward the distant peaks of the Alps, he knows this is no longer about just letters. It's about secrets, personal, political, and perhaps too dangerous for the world to see. Somewhere across the Swiss border, the truth of Eva Braun's final days waits, sealed in ink and silence. The next move will take them into foreign territory, where war's end offers no guarantee of honesty, and every revelation comes with a price. By late May 1945, as the guns fall silent across Europe, the true war, the war for secrets, begins. In London, within the subdued halls of the Special Operations Executive Headquarters at Baker Street, new intelligence arrives from American counterparts in the field. Coded dispatches reference the same mystery that has haunted Allied intelligence for weeks. A missing cache of personal letters written by Eva Braun, smuggled through southern Germany in the final weeks of the Third Reich. What began as rumor has now grown into a verified operation, its name whispered only among a select few: Operation Lantern. In the ruins of post-war Munich, British SOE and US CIC teams work side by side, tracing the remnants of Hitler's private network. Their interrogation rooms are filled with the shadows of the old regime. Secretaries, adjutants, and couriers who once served in the Berghof or the Reich Chancellery. One name keeps resurfacing: Leni Schneider. The elusive assistant of Eva Braun, last seen on April 26th, boarding a train toward Innsbruck. Witnesses claim she carried a leather satchel bound with red ribbon and refused to let it out of her sight. Lieutenant Margaret Thorne, the British cryptanalyst attached to Harper's unit, leads the interrogations with calm precision. Her methods are subtle, part empathy, part psychological insight. Many of the captured women, once clerks or aides in the Nazi bureaucracy, are disillusioned, frightened, and eager to save themselves. In one report, Thorne notes, "The name Eva elicits mixed emotions: fear, envy, pity. Some viewed her as powerless, others as dangerously close to power itself." From their testimonies, a picture begins to form: Eva Braun, trapped in luxury, aware of the Reich's moral rot, yet emotionally bound to its leader until the very end. One breakthrough comes from a captured SS courier named Heinrich Förster. Under questioning, he admits to transporting sealed packets from the Berghof to Munich in late April, under the lady's order. When pressed on the contents, Förster claims ignorance, but recalls that the courier's documentation carried a Swiss banking watermark, a detail too precise to ignore. British field officers suspect that the letters were to be safeguarded or monetized through neutral intermediaries, possibly as leverage for escape or post-war protection. Thorne and Harper dig deeper. Through decrypted intercepts from the Swiss legation in Berlin, they uncover references to documents of emotional nature sent under diplomatic seal. These phrases, buried in bureaucratic correspondence, ignite the team's curiosity. Could Eva Braun, long dismissed as a naive companion, have attempted to preserve her version of history, or even confess her knowledge of the atrocities unfolding around her? Historians later confirm that by 1943, Braun was no longer entirely sheltered from reality. Allied bombings, the loss of friends, and Hitler's growing paranoia left her isolated at the Berghof. Diaries recovered after the war describe her emotional instability, longing for normalcy, yet trapped by loyalty. One line, believed to be in her hand, reads, "He no longer looks at me." The man I knew is consumed by shadows. I remain here, for I have no other self. For Thorne and Harper, these words transform the investigation from intelligence work into something darker, an inquiry into human fragility amidst power. The trail leads to Zurich. A coded message intercepted by the British legation mentions a deposit of sentimental value held under a false account name, Herr Weiss. Cross-referencing the alias, the SOE discovers a Swiss banker with Nazi connections, Otto Weissmann, known for handling assets of fleeing officials. But before they can act, another complication arises. Soviet agents operating under the guise of Red Cross officials have begun interrogating former SS staff in Vienna, seeking personal effects of Frau Braun. It becomes clear that Moscow too is aware of the letters and their potential propaganda value. By June, Harper's small team arrives in Zurich under diplomatic cover. The city, untouched by war, hums with quiet tension, a crossroads for fugitives, spies, and stolen fortunes. Thorne arranges a discreet meeting with Weissmann, who insists that no such deposit exists. Yet her trained eye catches the flicker of fear behind his composure. Later that night, their informant, a clerk in Weissmann's office, delivers a cryptic note slipped beneath her hotel door, written in English. You seek her truth. Some truths were never meant to be told. Leave before the Russians arrive. The team's mission takes on a new urgency. Harper authorizes surveillance on the bank, while Thorne examines coded ledgers recovered from Munich, searching for matching account numbers. Days pass without success. Then on June 14th, a breakthrough, a telegram from London. Documents of psychological importance confirmed. Possible reference to Braun's emotional correspondence. Priority read. The phrase psychological importance implies something beyond intelligence, something personal, possibly explosive. But the leads remain fragile. Witnesses vanish. Swiss intermediaries grow silent. Even among Allied officers, whispers circulate that the US and Britain are pursuing different goals. One to expose the truth, the other to contain it. What had begun as a hunt for lost letters now resembles a quiet, ideological tug-of-war between victors. Thorne records in her field journal. We chase ghosts through a neutral city, searching for the soul of a woman history has already judged. Yet perhaps it is we who fear what she might say. Not about him, but about us. As their time in Switzerland draws short, a coded message arrives from London. The woman's final confession located, secure before Soviet contact. The coordinates point towards Zurich's old district, near a safe house used by former German diplomats. It is there, in the next chapter, that the truth, or its closest facsimile, will finally come into view. For now, the mystery deepens. The letters of Eva Braun are no longer mere artifacts of history. They have become currency in the emerging shadow war, a war where words, not bullets, decide the shape of truth. Zurich, June 1945. The city hums with a deceptive calm. Streetcars roll along Bahnhofstrasse. Bankers stroll beneath chestnut trees, and in discreet cafes, men in grey suits speak softly in German, English, and Russian. Beneath this civility, the real work of post-war Europe unfolds. Laundering gold, trading intelligence, and, for Captain William Harper's small Allied detachment, searching for the vanished letters of Eva Braun. The coded cable from London has given them a lead, a final confession referenced in a Swiss banker's message, likely tied to accounts belonging to Otto Weissmann. Harper and Lieutenant Margaret Thorne, the British cryptanalyst, operate under diplomatic cover, posing as cultural attachés. Their Swiss contact, an OSS liaison named George Dellinger, warns them of the stakes. You're not the only ones hunting ghosts, he says. The Russians have a man in Bern asking the same questions. You find those letters first, or they'll disappear forever. For 2 weeks, Harper's team watches Weissmann's Zurich offices. Each day, discreet couriers arrive from Geneva, carrying sealed pouches marked diplomatic. Most are legitimate business. But one day, July 2nd, a courier carries a black satchel bound in red tape, matching the description of Braun's package seen weeks earlier on the train from Munich. Harper gives the order. 2 agents follow the courier through the Bahnhofstrasse arcades to a townhouse near the Limmat River, registered to a former Swiss consular clerk, a man named Emil Gerber. When questioned under diplomatic pretense, Gerber insists the satchel contains family papers left by a deceased friend in Germany. Thorn catches the slip. The friend's initials, written on the satchel tag, read EB. Harper seizes the bag under Allied authority. Inside, a small packet of papers, meticulously wrapped in waxed linen. The ink has faded, but the handwriting is delicate, precise. The first page reads, "My dearest, these words are for the time when silence has taken us all." Over the next days, Thorn translates and verifies the content. The letters are real. They date from 1943 to April 1945, written in Eva Braun's hand, many addressed only to "my love" or "my light in the darkness." What emerges is not propaganda, nor apology, but a portrait of a woman caught between intimacy and moral ruin. She speaks of fear, of the man she no longer recognizes, of the burning cities she dreams she cannot escape, and of the officers who whisper behind closed doors. One letter from late March 1945 reads, "He does not sleep anymore. He speaks to shadows, to maps. When I remind him of laughter, he calls me foolish, as if joy is treason. I stay, not from devotion, but because I am part of the myth he built, and myths are not allowed to walk away." The phrasing shocks even the hardened intelligence officers. It suggests Eva Braun was not blind to the Reich's collapse, that she saw Hitler not as a god, but as a man unraveling. Among the letters is one final, undated note, the so-called confession. In it, Braun writes of her wish to flee Berlin, of an unnamed intermediary who promised safe passage through Switzerland, and of her fear that those who keep the ledgers would destroy her story. She ends with a haunting line, "If these words survive me, let them be known. Love cannot absolve power." For Thorn, this discovery changes everything. She insists the letters must be preserved as evidence of moral complicity, a human testimony from inside Hitler's circle. Harper, however, receives orders from higher up. A classified cable from Washington arrives under the signature of OSS Deputy Director William J. Donovan. Secure all materials. Transfer to London for joint evaluation. Public disclosure unauthorized until further directive. The implication is clear. The letters are now too politically sensitive to release. In the dawning Cold War, propaganda value outweighs historical truth. If revealed, they might humanize Hitler's inner circle or fuel Soviet narratives of Allied suppression. Thorn confronts Harper. "We came here for truth," she says. "Now we're burying it." Harper replies only, "That's how wars end," with silence written over the noise. Before they can depart Zurich, word reaches them that Soviet agents have crossed into Switzerland under diplomatic cover. One of Weissman's clerks vanishes overnight, his apartment ransacked. Documents disappear from the bank's vaults. It becomes evident that the Russians, too, know about the letters, or at least their significance. Harper orders an immediate extraction. On the night of July 10th, the team drives north toward Basel with the satchel locked in a steel case. At the border, Swiss customs officers stall them, a delay likely arranged by unseen hands. Moments before dawn, Thorn notices a man in civilian clothes watching from the shadows of the customs house. Tall, silent, wearing a Red Cross armband. When their convoy finally crosses into France, the figure is gone. Inside their car, Thorn clutches the satchel as if it was something living. "If we lose this," she whispers, "we lose her voice forever." Harper doesn't reply. He knows what awaits in London. Classification, censorship, and eventual burial in some forgotten archive. Yet even he can't shake the unease that follows him down the dark road from Switzerland. The next morning, a coded message reaches them at the Allied base in Reims. Soviet delegation demands return of private correspondence seized illegally in neutral territory. Somehow, the Kremlin already knows. Someone, somewhere has talked. The letters of Eva Braun, once written in the quiet desperation of love and fear, are no longer private at all. They are a weapon traded between victors in a new and invisible war. For Harper and Thorn, the mission's success feels hollow. They have found what they sought, but in doing so, they have entered a deeper kind of conflict, one not measured in battlefields or borders, but in truth itself. And as the first rains of summer fall over Zurich, the question lingers: whose version of history will survive? The one written by those who lived it, or the one rewritten by those who won? Berlin, April 1945. The city is a collapsing fortress. streets reduced to rubble, skies thick with smoke, the air trembling with the sound of Soviet artillery. In the underground Führerbunker, where Hitler and his closest circle have retreated, the atmosphere is claustrophobic, stagnant, and filled with denial. Above them, the once mighty capital of the Reich burns. Below, the final act of the war, and the lives within it, draw toward their inevitable end. In these final days, Eva Braun is no longer the hidden mistress of the Führer. She has chosen to remain by his side, even as friends and officers plead with her to flee. Multiple witnesses later describe her calm demeanor, her insistence that she would share his fate, her polite farewells to those preparing to escape. Yet intelligence gathered after the war paints a more complex portrait, a woman divided between devotion and despair, aware that escape was possible, but unwilling to live with the weight of what she had seen. According to reports from survivors, including Hitler's valet Heinz Linger and Secretary Traudl Junge, Eva spends her last days writing, not propaganda or love notes, but letters, short reflective messages sealed in small envelopes, written in her delicate blue ink. Junge later recalled her words, "If anyone finds these, they will know I stayed, but not why." What happened to these letters after her death has never been conclusively proven, but fragments recovered from Allied and Soviet archives suggest that some were smuggled out of Berlin through couriers in the final hours of the Reich. The US Counterintelligence Corps learns of these letters weeks later through an intercepted message sent from a field operative. In the ruins of Munich, recovered correspondence, possibly Eva Braun, dated April 28th. Harper's team, still in transit from Zurich, receives word as they enter occupied Germany. The discovery comes from an unexpected source, a German Red Cross nurse named Hilde Kramer, detained near Nuremberg, carrying a satchel of personal papers. Among them, Allied officers find several unmarked envelopes, each sealed with wax and unsigned, but written unmistakably in Braun's hand. The contents are brief, disjointed, and haunting. One reads, "They told me to run, but where would I go? My life began here, in his shadow, and it must end here." Another, "To whoever finds this, forgive us or do not. There is no defense for blindness, willingly kept." And a third, dated April 28th, simply says, "Tell the world I saw it coming." The tone is not of apology, but resignation. The voice of a woman who understood that her name would forever be bound to the collapse of a nation. Harper and Lieutenant Thorne examine the documents under field conditions, verifying the handwriting against known samples recovered from the Berghof. They match the ink, the phrasing, the paper, all consistent with Braun's earlier correspondence. Together, the letters form a tragic psychological portrait of the final hours of the Third Reich. But they also contain one puzzling passage, a mention of the courier who failed to arrive in Zurich, a clear reference to the intercepted trail they had followed in Switzerland. If true, it suggests that Eva's attempts to smuggle her writings had indeed reached beyond Berlin, that someone, perhaps even within Allied intelligence, had ensured their survival. At US Army headquarters in Frankfurt, the letters are logged under the reference EB Materials, Case File 47A. A classified memorandum sent to London states, "Documents of psychological and propaganda value. Recommend restricted access until further notice." Thorne protests the decision, arguing that Braun's final words are of historical importance, not to glorify, but to humanize, to reveal the corrosive intimacy of dictatorship. Harper agrees privately, yet follows his orders. The letters are sealed and transferred to an OSS courier bound for London. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. Yet for the intelligence officers who have spent months chasing shadows and secrets, victory brings little closure. In the chaos of post-war bureaucracy, the Eva Braun file disappears into the labyrinth of Allied archives. Officially, it never existed. Months later, in occupied Berlin, British journalist Ian Fleming, working as a liaison for naval intelligence, hears whispers of the woman's letters circulating among Soviet officers. The Russians claim to possess originals, but when asked for proof, they present only fragments, charred paper, copied translations, inconsistent handwriting. Still, the rumor persists that multiple versions of the letters exist, one held by the West, another by the Soviets, and perhaps a third that vanished with the couriers who never made it across Switzerland. In the decades that follow, historians searching declassified files at Kew Gardens in the US National Archives find scattered references to Operation Echo, a joint Anglo-American mission launched in mid-1945 to secure psychological documents from the ruins of the Reich. No official record lists what those documents contained, but one index entry remains partially visible under layers of redaction. E. Braun, correspondence, Zurich, Berlin. The rest is blacked out. For Harper and Thorne, the mission leaves an invisible scar. Their reports end abruptly after the summer of 1945. Thorne resigns from the SOE in 1946, citing ethical fatigue. Harper returns to the United States, assigned to post-war intelligence work, never speaking publicly of Zurich or the letters. Yet years later, a note found among his personal effects reads, "She was neither innocent nor evil. She was the mirror, and we looked away." As the war's physical ruins give way to reconstruction, the psychological ruins remain buried beneath layers of secrecy. The letters of Eva Braun, if ever released, might have shown not the monstrosity of power, but its humanity, its emotional weakness. Perhaps that was what made them most dangerous. By the time the archives reopened decades later, the satchel, the wax seals, and the fragile sheets of blue ink are gone. Only the rumors remain, drifting between historians and intelligence veterans like echoes from the bunker, faint, human, and unresolved. The Allies won the war, but the truth, it seems, was another casualty. Decades later, in the quiet stacks of the US National Archives in College Park, Maryland, a researcher sifts through declassified intelligence files from 1945. Among the faded carbon copies and yellowed memoranda, one document catches his eye. File 47A, Operation Echo. The pages are heavily redacted, names blacked out, margins scribbled with notes in pencil. Zurich transfer confirmed. Subject, E. Braun correspondence. And then, a line underlined twice, document sealed, July 1945, joint custodianship with British authorities. For historians, this is the ghost trail of a mystery buried in secrecy for nearly half a century. The story of Eva Braun's letters, the private words of the woman closest to Adolf Hitler, has become one of the Cold War's most tantalizing historical enigmas. The existence of the letters is confirmed by fragments, eyewitnesses, and obscure references across Allied intelligence reports. But the full content, the so-called confession, has never been released. The deeper question remains, why? In the late 1940s, the OSS becomes the CIA, and British SOE transitions into MI6. Files from Operation Echo are absorbed into new intelligence repositories, their content marked classified indefinitely. The official rationale: potential political sensitivity, material of psychological and propaganda impact. Unofficially, these letters represent something neither side wishes to confront: the human intimacy inside one of history's darkest regimes. For the victors, Braun's words blur the boundary between guilt and victimhood, between love and complicity. By the 1950s, whispers of the Zurich letters circulate through diplomatic and journalistic circles. Some claim the documents portray Hitler as paranoid, broken, almost childlike in his final weeks. Others insist they reveal Braun's emotional collapse, her recognition of moral ruin, her plea for understanding. But without the originals, no account can be proven. Both the US and British governments deny their existence. In a classified 1957 memorandum, a CIA archivist notes, "File requested by British liaison under diplomatic cover. No further trace." The letters, once tangible evidence of human frailty inside the Reich, have now vanished into bureaucratic oblivion. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, fragments emerge through controlled leaks. The KGB releases what it claims to be translations of Braun's final writings, though historians quickly note inconsistencies, language too formal, tone too ideological. Still, the Soviet version spreads widely in post-war Europe, feeding propaganda that frames Braun as a deluded accomplice, a symbol of fascist womanhood destroyed by her own blindness. The Western powers remain silent, choosing secrecy over counter-narrative. In the 1960s, as Germany rebuilds, journalists begin probing the archives again. One BBC documentary, Echoes of the Bunker, uncovers testimonies from surviving Allied intelligence officers. A retired British cryptanalyst unnamed in the film recalls handling personal letters written by Eva Braun, smuggled through Zurich before being ordered to surrender them under the highest secrecy directive. He says, quietly, "We weren't meant to learn about her humanity, only his monstrosity. The Cold War only deepens the silence. As East and West weaponize information, truth becomes a political asset, controlled, edited, erased. Operation Echo disappears from intelligence listings entirely by 1973. When the files are reviewed again in the 1990s, after declassification initiatives, archivists discover gaps, entire folders missing, accession logs rewritten. Only a handful of microfilm references remain, labeled destroyed in transit. And yet in 1998, a small set of documents emerges from the British National Archives at Kew. Redacted beyond recognition, they refer obliquely to psychological materials recovered from Swiss territory, 1945. One line, barely visible through black ink, reads, "Correspondence between EB and the subject, retained for internal review." Historians debate whether the subject refers to Hitler or to another unknown recipient. The ambiguity only fuels the intrigue. For those who seek closure, the absence of proof is itself a story. Eva Braun remains frozen in history's imagination, the smiling figure beside Hitler, the silent observer of his madness. But the letters, real or suppressed, suggest another truth, that within the walls of the Berghof and the bunker, even the most devoted adherents of power felt fear, doubt, and despair. Her writings, if genuine, would challenge the simplistic binary of monster and victim, showing how ordinary emotion can coexist with extraordinary evil. Captain William Harper died in 1964. Lieutenant Margaret Thorne, who fought to preserve the letters, vanished from public life. When her estate was catalogued after her death in 1987, one item drew curiosity, a sealed envelope addressed in her own hand. Zurich, July 1945 for history. Inside were no documents, only a single line typed on aging paper. Truth was never the secret. Silence was. Today, the legacy of the so-called secret letters of Eva Braun lingers in the grey zone between myth and documentation. Whether hidden in a vault or destroyed long ago, they represent a haunting possibility that inside the regime of terror and ideology, there once existed a voice that sought neither redemption nor denial, only remembrance. In the end, perhaps that is the true meaning of Operation Echo, a warning that even in victory, the victors may choose what to remember and what to forget. History, like those vanished letters, is written not only by the powerful, but also by those who decide what must remain unseen. And so, the camera fades, from the silent corridors of an archive to the black and white photograph of a woman smiling at the edge of history. Eva Braun, lover, witness, prisoner of her own choices. Her letters may be gone, but their echo endures, whispering still through the long shadows of the war that never truly ended.